Alrighty, hello. Here, let me grab the computer I'm going to be using. Oh, mic fell down. And I need to grab this. Put this down here. So now we've got something to see. And pop this open. I'm going to need to get the no. Speaker plugged in, because gotta be, well, actually it's going to screw everything up, isn't it? Apologies, this is all messed up. It's been that kind of week, whatever. My microphone fell on the floor and everything. Let's see, let's get some of these things set up. There's the coding stream. There's the macros. I can't see what you're saying yet, but whatever. And coding, picture-in-picture run. There we go. Having done that, I don't need to run a TEM micro. Alrighty. You may note I'm not using the fancy mic, and that's because I'm switching over to the lavalier so that I can bend over and work on the computer, you see. It's kind of... Don't mind me, we'll manage all of this somehow. Let's see. What am I doing? What am I doing? We're engaging chat window. And we're going to pop out the chat. And display it. Lorenzo Costas, hello. And there we go. Alrighty, so long as I scooch back here, also seeing as I have the lav, let me test out whether this is going to work for me as far as experimenting. It's probably going to sound kind of weird, but at least I have audio, so there's that. Stop it. Stop buzzing and humming and stuff. Arg. Really what I should do is lean this up against something. It doesn't want to lean. Aha, score. So that ought to work. Oop. Except for that jack is humming terribly. Hey Bo, hey Daniel, Lorenzo. How are you folks doing? We are here, and probably I might as well leave the coding screen up there. It's been a kind of exhausting couple of weeks, I must say. I'm feeling a little better. Yesterday I was fairly under the weather, but we bounced back as best we can. Hope you can hear me fine, but I suspect you can. Just fooling with this lavalier here, which is my technique for doing the music jams, and let me just crank up the volume as loud as humanly possible. And that might be a little bit noisy, but at least you can hear what's going on. Oh, and let me put chat to live chat just so that people don't get edited out or anything. So yeah. I was quite busy this morning, even before talking to you. Isn't it good that I have a compressor on that? Yay. That'll save you having a compressor on the mic. Notably, Mogami cables, you know, I'm not sure if I would go so far as to recommend specific wire. Like, the geometry and construction of wire is as important as getting a particular name brand. For instance, it's pretty worthless getting like something like Monster Cable, where a lot of the money that you spend goes into A, marketing it, and B, suing people who also use that name. So price is not an indicator as far as wire is concerned, but material and construction is. So if you're talking monitor speakers, I don't currently have wire handy unless I was to like take off the mic and run down to the basement and dig up the wires that I use for it. But I do have custom wires. Here, let me fool with the zoom. I do have custom wires on my monitors. However, they're not expensively bought wires. They are polyethylene tubing with 2 lengths of solid core house wire wrapped around it in a particular geometry. So it's partly excuse me. It's partly about having enough copper in the wire to carry your signal properly, and then also about the geometry of how that's oriented, like what the capacitance is going to be, what the inductance is going to be. Now, how would you... Are those active monitors? Bo, that's an interesting question. Let me answer it. What exaggerates mouth clicks and stuff is actually something that I'll be suffering to some extent using this lavalier mic, rather than... I could be using the good mic that I make the videos with and that I'd be recording vocals with if I was doing vocals on something, but it would sit where my keyboard is currently sitting, and I need to have the laptop here so that you can see me coding, and the whole thing just basically doesn't work. So I'm using the lavalier, and I've got a little foam windscreen because the way I'm using it in my and I'm compressing so hard. I don't need to be this loud. Excuse me, folks. Let me dial that back to half a notch. There we go. It was more loud than I needed to be. What magnifies the mouth noises, which I do not like those either, so if you're asking because you don't like that stuff, I don't like it either, is high frequency response and accuracy. You hear that kind of stuff off of tiny, cheap lavalier mics. You hear that stuff off of tiny condenser microphones that are ringy, that are exaggerating. the super highs, and anytime you're in a situation where it's just atrocious, listen to the tone that you're getting off of things, and you'll probably hear that the tone is going to be excruciatingly bright. To some extent, analog will restrict stuff like that simply because if you're running into weak and poor analog and crappy mixers and things that are all noisy, one of the things that they do to suppress analog noise in cheap mixers is put a bunch of capacitors to ground and basically cut down the noise by cutting down the high frequency response of the mixer. And if you're doing that, you're going to be controlling what the lavalier mic is doing. Essentially, when you're using those tiny little condenser capsules, and the large diaphragm ones are not quite the same, I think they'll have resonances in different places. They can pick up as much highs, but they're less likely to ring like a drum at those frequencies, whereas the little itty-bitty tiny lavaliers have a real tendency to exaggerate that stuff. And again, right now, the one that I'm wearing, so that I can lean over and code, for instance, and you can still hear me properly, it's not a cheap lav. It's, I'm trying to remember whether it's a Sony or a Panasonic or something like that, or maybe it's a Shure, I forget. I can find out. It's written on the mic. Let's see. It's a Sennheiser. So this lavalier is a Sennheiser MZA 900. It looks like what that is, 900p. Actually, that's the adapter. Never mind. But it is the same kind. Here's a marking on the mic cable. This lavalier is an MKE2 GW. It is made in Germany, and it is not a garbage lavalier. If you get a garbage lavalier, it's likely to be more bright and tizzy and stuff. This is more like a commercial grade lavalier, which you might find in a new studio or something. But yeah, what causes those annoying sounds is essentially either the size, and you're saying LDC, which means large diameter condenser for newcomers showing up, and if you're picking up annoying noises like that, it's probably a kind of mic where you got a massive presence boost. So one thing you could do is get the foam windscreen for it. Like I've got a foam windscreen on my lav. And that's partly so I can cup it and talk into it when doing a music stream. And then I don't have feedback at the normal time because I'm tucking it in my hand and blasting it, and the amplitude of that is so much higher than regular sound pressure levels. Like to be able to hear this at normal lav distances, I have the preamp cranked way up. Also, the microphone is going to interact with the preamp. It's going to interact with the mic pre. So you might have a bad combination there. And some of this, like, I will say this. You're talking about getting presumably an analog transformer. Firstly, you're talking about an LDC, so you probably can't just put a transformer in the signal path, otherwise you won't be powering the microphone. If you do have a way of doing that, like it has its own power supply, then you could do that, and that might be an effective way of softening the highs. You can also get one of those RF filters, like radio suppression filters, you know, the little ferrite things that are little clamshell things that you clip onto a cable. You can get something like that. Like here is the wire of my lavalier. If you get something like that, the little kind of box-shaped thing with a hole in the middle, and you close the ferrite filter onto it. If the wire is thin enough, you can loop it through that ferrite bead area, the ferrite clamp that you put onto it several times. The more you do that, you're inductively damping the high frequencies out of the wire. And I do this quite often. I do this with bass sounds and things. But if I was trying to tame a bright condenser mic that wasn't behaving, I think that's the first thing I would try to do, is start putting inductive damping on that. That's what you would be doing with a transformer. But if you have one of those little clips, that's going to essentially do the same thing. Oh, you got a transformer that's made for working with phantom power microphones? That's weird. Usually they're for isolating from voltages. So I don't know how that would work. Does it have phantom power on the other side of it? Its own little power supply? I don't know much about the DBX compressors. I know that some people swear by them, and not necessarily cheap and cheerful people. I would say cheaper DBX compressors, probably if you're looking at getting something old school, like cheap because it's in a pawn shop, then you might do well out of that. Even if it's not like, this is audiophile stuff, then you could get something that had character and an interesting sound to it. And that's always worth looking into as well. Wow, rapid burst of questions. I grabbed some papers because I was going to tell you what I was doing this morning before actually starting up. I am ordering more parts, and I am working fervently towards the goal of either setting up a way of selling synthesizer building parts for $1, or maybe I'll just start giving the stuff away on streams and whatever. I need to talk to my accountant about how I need to go about this, because it would be a way of changing how I'm doing business, and there are very likely consequences. It might actually be better for me to accumulate all of this stuff where, like, excuse me, accumulate all of this stuff where, like, I have inductors that you can use for building with that are 10 cents, and LEDs that are 2 cents each or 1 cent each. I'm actually talking to the people that I'm getting the LEDs from, and it's a special sort of giant lot of these rather cheap yellow LEDs that would go nicely with the perf board design I'm talking about. I'm going to talk to them about buying all of their LEDs in hopes of getting it down to either, you know, them being 1 cent instead of 2 cent LEDs. So instead of getting 50 of them for $1, you'd get 100 of them for $1. Or maybe just being able to give them away in piles. Like, oh, here's my care kit, here's a piece of circuit board, here is this, supply your own soldering iron, here's some wire. I'm talking to the people with the wire again. That's kind of exciting in its way. I heard back from the wire manufacturer, and they were like, just following up. And apparently they did not see my response where I was filling out their form and going, okay, here's my statement, here's my information, enter me into your system, and then please sell me 18 miles of wire. Okay, thanks, bye. I don't think they ever saw that email. They just emptiness after a certain point. So I responded to a follow-up saying, didn't you get my message? This is what I sent you. I included a PDF attached to it. Maybe that's what killed it, is that So now I have uploaded the PDF to a server of mine, and I responded with the link rather than responding with an attached file, and maybe that'll get through. If I do that, I'll have wire that you can use for various purposes at enormously, impossibly low cost. I have 470 microfarad capacitors for power supplies, 16 for $1. I've already got a big old pile of those, and I'm ordering more. Today I should be getting 2 more reels of the things, because it's such a good price on electrolytic capacitors. And it'll handle Eurorack voltages quite happily as well. 25 volts, it'll handle it just fine. And if you can afford to have like dozens of these, like 10 of these 470 microfarad capacitors in a power supply, equates to a 4,700 microfarad capacitor, because they're all hooked up in series. I mean, they're parallel, sorry. They're all hooked up in parallel. So you can have a sort of high power supply capacitor in every little piece of the synthesizer, every little module, and then wire them up with wires going to the sort of central power area. I have got more of my 200K sealed trim pots. I also got another pile of those out of, this time, DigiKey. DigiKey sold me a box of them. And I also got smaller boxes of 100K, 1 meg, and 100 ohm sealed trim pots. Also out of DigiKey, also a discontinued thing, because the deal is with that, they match the 200K, so I can have a visual consistency of constructing this stuff. Downside is I don't have mass quantities of those ones. I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, but it still means that they end up being more like 4 or 3 for $1 rather than 18 for $1 on the 200K. And this is just this, I do this for fun. I'm like trying to twist people's arms and get amazing bargains so that I can make this kind of stuff available. And before going live, I was talking with All Electronics and saying, hey guys, give me a price on some of these things. Give me, let me see, what was I thinking of? It's over here. I'm gonna lean off camera for a second. Yeah, because this is what's arriving. I'm getting more of the 470 microfarad, and I'm also getting more 2.1 millimeter power jacks. I'm going to have about 600 of them. That's more than I'm going to need, because for any given build, you may have any number of modules, but you're probably only going to need one, because you're going to get a power supply from like a Moog semi-modular, or All Electronics has a $6 power supply that will work on a Moog semi-modular, and it's $6, and it'll push 3 amps if you need. So you only need one of those, and you only need one of the power jacks to get the voltage into the circuitry, at which point it gets distributed off towards all the modules. But yeah, the bits that I was looking at and wanting to get mass quantities of, I'm going to be having electronics classes. That's what this is all about. You don't get to see much of it until I have the parts on hand to start actually running with it. We will be building, VCOs is going to be the first thing. There's lots more coming, but the first thing is going to be, let's build a drone synthesizer out of like a 40106. Basically, it's like a drone synthesizer for about $4 out of a 40106 chip, which is a what's called the Schmidt-Trigger hex inverter, meaning that it's a voltage flipper, but it waits till you hit a threshold, so it's what you build oscillators out of. It's an oscillator that will always start up and work. And that gives you 6 oscillators, and you can have these 200K pots, you can have 18 of them for $1, because they're trim pots and they were surplus. So you only, and I'm probably going to be using the 200K pots also for mixer duties. they're going to be the resistances into building a mixer, because you also get to trim and adjust them. So they become like the fader and the mix element all in one. But yeah, with the oscillator thing, one chip for about $1. 18 of these trim pots for $1. And then it's a matter of capacitors, and then you're good. And again, I've got a kajillion really huge capacitors coming in. You won't need those, although you need one of them for the power supply. And then I'm asking about, this is the further thing that I'm doing. I was asking about an ultra bright red LED. Turns out that's not going to be a massive quantity buy, because that's something that All Electronics has reorderable. They keep it in stock. They have a ultra bright red LED, LED-233, kept in stock. If you were to buy 1,000 of them, that's like $0.25, but you're probably going to buy like 100 or 10 of them. They're happy about selling you 10 or whatever. So I'm going to be steering people to All Electronics for lots and lots of stuff. But I'm also going to be buying their entire supplies out of a variety of things, because I can redistribute those things for free. And then if you want to build a Vactrol or something like that, I'll go to All, and they have this ultra bright red LED. Now you might ask, Chovid19 is asking me, have you ever thought about having a Discord? I do actually have a Discord. It's essentially useless. I would say if you want Discord, go and join Colin Bender's Discord for modular synthesis. Because being like a synthesizer pop star, his Discord is huge. Mine has like nobody on it. So there's very little point going there. Nobody's using it. It's not a thing. But I am on Colin's, and I'm also on a Discord by some folks who are, in fact, they made a special Airwindows category for me, although I think then they moved to a different Discord. There's some people who are building a follow-up to the Axolotl synthesizer, and I'm on their Discord. And yeah, go with Colin's. Go with Colin Bender's Discord. That has, because the thing about it is, even when you have like 40,000 people on the Discord, there's still only about 10 of them posting on any given day. So if I was to try to publicize the link to my Discord, there wouldn't be anybody there. Oh, has Mufflicker got a Discord? That's interesting. I could go there. But yeah, to finish the thought about the stuff that I'm further getting, I am talking to All Electronics about what it would cost to buy up all of their 6.8 microfarad tantalum capacitors. It's very possible that rather than doing that, I'll just buy 1,000 of them and call it a day. They've got about 9,000, and they're about 35 cents. So buying all of their tantalum capacitors would be like $3,000 worth of stuff. But the thing about it is, if you did that, you'd be able to take your little chip and make it be sort of an LFO. It'd be a low-frequency oscillator. More relevantly, these 6.8 microfarad capacitors are what you would use if you wanted to have the signal path from your oscillators and stuff go to some other place in the circuit as an audio signal. You'd want to use a capacitor on the output of it, because you're probably going to have an output that goes from zero, ground or whatever, to some high voltage and back again. And you need to have it be positive, negative voltages to be an audio signal properly. And 6.8 microfarads in these types of circuits is a huge size. Like, I'm using 470 microfarads for the power supplies, because power supplies always need to have larger sizes. But as a DC blocking capacitor, we're talking we'll be able to make synthesizers out of these caps that are not exceptionally, like 35 cents is kind of costly, but for a cap of this quality, And it's not a 1 microfarad electrolytic. This is like a 6.8 microfarad tantalum. What tantalum sounds like as circuitry is it's kind of brighter and edgier. It's like what you get out of ceramic capacitors. It doesn't have the slight inductance of the windings of an electrolytic cap, which is made out of insulation and metallized or foil. So the tantalums give you a very bright, aggressive sound, but the 6.8 microfarads means it will have Mongo bass. We will be building synthesizers and drones and things like that that have huge honking bass like you'd get out of a Moog or something, or beyond. And that's why I'm looking at getting maybe 1,000 or 9,000 of those, just so that I have all of them in the world and can do anything I want with them. And lastly, I mentioned the 39-cent chip, thereabouts, the 40108, and the 18 potentiometers for it. Basically, all you need to make an oscillator is one of these chips, a resistance, and a capacitance. Now, the 6.8 microfarad is such high capacitance that the frequencies in these guys will go down to, like a couple of cycles per second. So we're not going to be using these expensive capacitors for that per se. But I'm also looking at and talking to All Electronics about their 4,700 picofarad polystyrene capacitors. And 1,000 of those are only $80, but I'm asking for how much to buy all of them. I might be able to get them for less than 8 cents. So that would be one of those things where it gets to be like 18, 20 or so. Maybe not quite as many as that, but a goodly number, 6, 12, 18 of these polystyrene capacitors for $1. And if you have 6 polystyrene caps, 6 potentiometers, even if they're these tiny little trim pots, and 1 chip, you have a 6 oscillator drone. And that's going to be our first project, is a 6 oscillator drone. Should be pretty fun. I will figure out what to do about that one, and then we can sort of build it together. And again, you can get I'm going to be making the information for how to get into this stuff available, so you don't have to wait on me. You don't have to wait on me getting these mass quantities of parts just so that I can feel comfortable about distributing them out to people. Like sending people care packages of like this basic stuff that you need to start building a synth. You shouldn't have to wait for me. Any of this stuff you could get yourself from All Electronics or a variety of other places. I'll be linking to Mouser, I'll be linking to All Electronics, I'll be linking to DigiKey and Adafruit. And there's stuff to get in all of them. But people need, when getting into the coding, and let's fire this up because I was going to do some coding before finishing up today and heading off, because I got chores and shopping for groceries and things that I have to do. I actually got the payment for the remainders of my Kagi shareware days not so long ago. Like, they sent me a check for what was left out of what Kagi owed me all those years ago when they went out of business. They went out of business owing me more than $800, and they sent me a check for $130. And it's like, boop, you're done. So I will be depositing that today and closing the book and all of that kind of stuff. Joku has a quick question. Can you make a capacitor from aluminum foil? You kind of can, but you'll find that it is a very high frequency capacitor. In order to make low frequency capacitors like you would make audio frequencies go through or put in audio circuitry, you typically would have to build much more delicate kinds of things. And this is part of what makes stuff have its sound. Like some of the reasons that old gear has a particular sound is you might find a like 1 microfarad capacitor or a 0.47 microfarad capacitor. These days it would be so tiny you wouldn't even be able to see it because it would be microscopic, and all the little wires inside it or the foil would be so delicate that it's almost not there. Back in the day, old guitar amps and stuff like that, they couldn't do that, so they did have to make capacitors out of aluminum foil. And it's like this big. It's like the size of your fist. So the equipment was much more cumbersome, but it also had the capacity for extremely beefy tones through the ability to carry transient impulses very rapidly without restriction. Where can you get the link to the Discord servers you mentioned earlier? What I would do, this is kind of how I talk through coding problems as well. I would go on YouTube and search for Colin Benders. Colin Benders is an electronic musician. You should be following his music thing. I actually jammed with the guy a couple of days ago. I was going to follow his stream with a stream of my own, and I was listening to his music. And then I started playing mine, and he wasn't quite done. And I was able to monitor it by clicking one of my buttons on the mixer. And I'm like, yep, there he is. It's called sampling. And then I clicked it again, and I listened to him, and realized that my guitar was patched through with reverb only, and I could play on top of what he was doing, and I was streaming. So I started doing that, and the dude went off. He like went nuts for a half an hour, never knowing that I was restreaming him. I was doing what David Pixley likes to do, which is take somebody else's stream and then add something else on top of it and restring it. Yeah, Benders, B-E-N-D-E, like the robot in Futurama. And yeah, Kagi did make Charles Dye Mix It Like a Record. And in fact, they paid me for 10 years. They were very good until they went bust. They never shortchanged me until that last time when they just like, we're done. We're going out of business. We can't pay anybody this month or ever after. And so that's how that works. Yeah, go ahead and post the link, but I'm not sure that my chat is going to accept it. That's YouTube doing it. So I don't necessarily have the power to... I should check like the MatrixReverb code. Here it is. I don't have the power to make YouTube accept links from you. So what I would do is spell it out or whatever. I mean, I want you to post the link, but you probably can't. But yeah, that's like the go-to Discord server for modular synthesists and electronic musicians and such. And it's fun. It's like part of my evidence of him being a nice guy is that I did this jam and ended up playing for a half an hour on top of what he was doing, which was, I had not really ever taken into account how much fun that can be. So afterwards, he went offline and I did my own jam, which went on for another hour and then answered some questions and then I was done. And went and asked him if that was okay. And he got back to me and he was like, wow, cool, happy accident. Yeah, go ahead and keep it on your channel. And so I am. I didn't actually post that part to my SoundCloud because it was partly somebody else's content. But he gave me permission to leave it on the YouTube channel. So if you're interested in what I sound like playing with Colin, it exists. It's the most recent music jam that I've done. So yeah, we've gone for about 45 minutes or so. I started a hair late, but I'm going to go for about 2 hours or so. So let's start tinkering with this stuff. Oh no, Matrix is going to give you all the math. But this is the bit that we'll use for, firstly, build this. It has some warnings. I don't know what the warnings are. Oh, that's what the warnings are. We got a bunch of sliders and we got this. And I remember what we were doing with it. We were making noise with it. I was thinking we could just play a little bit today. Here's a new instance of that. And I remember one of the things that I did was I fired up DrumRig. This is all the stuff I've been working on, and here is, this might blow up. Yeah, we made something that goes clang. Now I don't remember exactly what I had going on here because I didn't label anything. So here's the first thing is let's go and label this stuff. What does it do? It's been a while since I've worked on this, so let's find out what this did. I'm using these 3 faders, clearly. Sound is coming in. It's not processing any of this stuff so much. Input sample is the output of all of these. We got a dry wet control. Somewhere, I see where we've got something happening. So here's what's happening. I've got gain, and gain is active here. I don't have dry wet happening, but I've seemingly, actually I do, it's on slider 10, I just didn't notice it. So slider 2 and slider 3 are doing something. Let's go and find out what that is. So, input sample equals sign input sample. That is console. This is happening inside console. Alp A++. See, some of this is, I wonder if I can rename this in scope. This is our counter. So let's update some of these things. I'm probably going to have to do it other places too. Yep, I'm going to have to do it here. Let's do it with find and replace and see whether we can do it in the entire project. That I don't honestly know. I suspect not, but I'm clicking through some of these things to find out. Oh, I don't think that did anything useful. Oh, this is switching back and forth between the pages I have here. This is showing which things they are. These are grayed out. It's file history. Sometimes I struggle with this kind of stuff as to how that stuff even works. I was going to change these things, so let's do that. Edit all in scope. Count B. You'll see the why of this in a moment. Count C. Hang on. I gotta put that back. No, wait, no I don't. I forgot to do edit all in scope. So there we have this, and when I did edit all in scope, that means that all the bits in here got updated. I gotta quickly go in through here and update those without actually breaking them, and then I need to switch to the other thing. I'd forgotten it could do that. No, I are confused. Okay, let's go and find out what's going on here. That's interesting. How's it building if it doesn't have its variables in existence? We are editing this. We've changed it to count. We're looking for the one that says alp in the other file. And it's here. Alp. Some of the rest of this will be cleaned up later. But this is the kind of stuff that you do when you don't want to end up later on being utterly and horribly confused and have no idea where it is. So we've got integers here, it's count and delay, and we are actually using those. We're not using this, I don't think. We might be. And then up here, we were going to, since we can build this now and it'll actually build, because I just changed the names of things without changing anything. It's giving me lots of warnings, but they're from this. So as we are going through this stuff, here this puts us into the console algorithm, and everything that we do from that point onwards is reverb code. This is interesting. It's a pity we can't update some of these things in more than one file, because it's going to be cumbersome doing this. But, oh, and everybody ran away when I started coding. No problem. This is me playing with the reverb, so this is just how this is going to be, guys. This is why you pay me money to do this for you, so you don't have to do this. So we got our count and stuff that's making our loop. We're putting this into the reverb buffer. Average E times average S tells us nothing about what that is, except for that we know that those are being saved up from the other file. Let's open the other file. Not like that. Like this. That's going to sit over here, but that's fine. So what we're going to do now is figure out what we were doing. Good. As long as somebody's appreciating this, or even if nobody's appreciating this, I don't care. I had a really hard week last week. I made a lot of progress on things. I have been updating plugins right and left. I updated clip only. That is now out. If you wanted the debugged clip only, it's out. The debugged loud is out. Somebody was running into problems where they were using it in their own code, and it had some non-initialized variables in the VST. And they called it to my attention. I was like, hey, this is the kind of stuff that I just update immediately. So yeah, I've been really busy. So if this is not an entertaining stream, whatever. This is me coding. This is how this actually works. But rather than strive strenuously, I'm doing whatever I feel like today. And we'll go as long as we want. I have been ordering electronic parts all morning, and we're going to see what we get. I'm tempted, this is what my little brother who's unfortunately gone all over to the alt-right or something, but back when we were talking, this is what he would call refactoring. And it really is valuable, it's just boring. So, this is why you do it. I have no idea what any of this means. I coded it, but I don't remember what it is. So, E and S. Tell you what, let's highlight all in scope. Doing that by edit all in scope, and then I scooch forwards and see what it is. And we're going to figure out what this means. Also, let's see whether maybe this is easier to figure out. Averager S is always going to be 1 unless it's something less, down to the point of 0. So the second part is a scaling factor of some kind, and this first part is something else. And this is going to be our regeneration. I bet you this is our regeneration. I bet this is about having that feedback quality going on. So let's first of all, and before we get diving into that, because this is going to build a MatrixReverb that we can make other things out of and experiment with, but I'm making it understandable for now. So slider 2 and slider 3, unuseful. They're not even marked on the controls of the plugin that we're building. So let's figure out what they do. We got a VGW plus equals. Delay W is a time. Remember how we're using delay W in, well, actually, no, not necessarily. Delay W is an integer, but that doesn't necessarily mean all that much. Where are we referring to delay W? Same deal. Oh, didn't want to edit all in scope that time. It doesn't want to edit all in scope there at all. Interesting. What about this? Nope. What about this? Because I know this works. All right. So delay A gives us something. Delay W starts out as 2,503. It is a number. We've made the delays in the top much, much smaller. These are all prime numbers. They're all kind of how you build a reverb tank. But the deal with some of this is that you might have reverb tanks being much smaller. And the buffers we're using are ginormous. We could make this be very different, but let's see. We seem to not be talking to delay W very often. I think we're just getting numbers out of this. AVGW equals, these are distinct numbers. They could be anything. They're being scaled down because, as you see, delay W times 0.00001 times slider 2. Only reason this says delay W rather than just a number is because I knew delay W had a number in it. It's these numbers, it's in the thousands, I'm making them become much smaller, and then I'm multiplying them by slider 2. So what we're really interested in is AVGW plus equals this tiny amount. So let's find out what else happens to AVGW. If anything, maybe nothing. Oh, and I see a bug. Do you see the bug? I see a bug. AVGW is meant to be a thing that just keeps slowly increasing until it like wraps around, because it's going into a thing here, sine. And that's the only place it's getting used. But here's the deal. This is a bug. These are clearly supposed to each be their distinct things. They're not. It only says Z every time. I'm using the same value each time. And then we've also got slider 3. This is our vibrato effect here. This is our vibrato effect. This is how we're pitch changing the things inside the reverb tank. Each of those are a delay. Here, let me quickly decide whether I want to quickly demonstrate this thing or not. Commenting that bit out. Now we're taking only one thing, and I will build it. And we'll put it in. So what we have here is now actually that's not true. I was going to say we have only one reverb tank in there, but this is a MatrixReverb. All of them go and feed into all of the others. So if we're listening to only one in the output, it's still giving us all of these. So let's take this back out again, because it kind of sounded the same. It just didn't sound the same in a useful way. I was going to isolate one of them, and it would take a lot more work to isolate one of these tanks. So let's leave them all there. But here's the thing. Quickly build that so that I can give you a quick glimpse of what it sounds like. Again, in old versions of macOS, you can do this. You can just update it. And what we have is a clangy sort of drone, a gain control, and second is doctoring the speed of how these things vary, how fast they're oscillating. And third is doing the intensity. So we go from this faster, slower. And you can hear there's a vibrato in there. So that's what we're doing. But here's the bug. Those are all the same, because it says here, offset A, offset everything is all AVGZ. We're calculating all of these. They're all distinct and different, but we're only using one. So all the different delay factors are going in lockstep. What we need to do is fix this bug by W. Why am I doing YXZ? That's weird. Whatever. I don't know why they're out of sequence that way. Let's doctor that. There's no reason. WXYZ. Maybe I wasn't able to recite my alphabet properly on this day. Some of these days get kind of heavy. You get really distracted with stuff, and then you don't know how to do the simplest things. But now we have WXYZ. Remember how it was, and it's going to remember what the settings were. Let's build that again. And then let's do a little 1-2 comparison. Firstly, here is the pre-debugged version, just as you heard it. A vibrato. But when I put the new version in, it's useful to be able to turn this stuff around this fast too. It's one of the downsides of recent macOS for this stuff. They're no longer quite the same. You can hear vibrato going on, but it's not obviously all of them together. They're going in different rates. So we get a nice little blur there. And if we speed it up, it gets really funky. So now we have a nice little vibrato going on with some of these. Although there are other things we could do. For instance, if we were to, here's some of the stuff that you can do. So I got that by updating some of these things. So that does mean that we can now edit this in place. And slider 2 is the speed at which things alter. And slider 3 was the depth. Oh, hang on. Undo that. I need to tell it to edit all in scope. So now that we have that going on, it has also updated it up here because it was all in scope. But if it was in the other file, it wouldn't have gotten those ones. So let's see, now that we've got that, what shall we do? We have got a, we built this the previous time, gradually getting it all working. And this sort of complicated stuff in here is doing an interpolated lookup in the delay time. We have a set of delays that goes all the way up to here. Shall we play with this again? We have this very clangy kind of thing. And also I will note that our speed is far too high, so let's divide that by 10. Now we'll have much slower alterations. And let's also make it a much larger potential depth, because we're going to get something crazy happening here. And then lastly, just for fun, let's see whether we can break this in an interesting way or not. We've got a variable defined that is making this big old buffer, and then we've made it tiny, these smaller numbers up here, because using the smaller numbers up there means that it's this continuous sustain, like you're hearing, but it is kind of like a gong or something. It's about experimenting with what's called the householder delay matrix. And how that works is this, that our numbers here, and this could be worth updating. I think maybe it is. Let's go back. Here's another place where we can clean stuff up a little bit. And I needed to look in here anyhow so that I could update the labels. Update the labels. Now the plugin will say what it is. and that'll be useful. But we're using these delay buffers, and we have lots more, but we only need 4 for this. And then we're using some of this stuff in here to work with it, but it's not named appropriately. And you can't see what I had there, so it was over here. So this is our feedback matrix. What we have called AVGE, like we're using AVGA, but I think technically we don't actually have to define it back there. I'm wondering whether we can refactor that a little bit as well. And then we're going to rename these things as soon as we have established it, because as you can see, what we've got here, we're just starting to do a thing, and it immediately defines the thing and then says equals this. It's not using any of what was there before, unless it said it in here, but it doesn't. It's not referring to a previous AVG, it's just taking it immediately and using it. That means we can define it there, and that means we can call it like output or something. Because what we're doing is we're building the delay tap, like where we're listening to the output of the delay tank in here. And that's what we're using this variable for. So Interpol. We're going to call it after the name of a detective agency. We're going to call it Interpol, but edit all in scope. Also notice how that did a thing where it was lighting up in blue. If it's lighting up in blue, that means that's a reserved word. You can't use it as a variable. The same thing here. Int. Yeah, you can't make a variable and call it an int. And if I do this, this will just work because it's using everything past this point. And again here. If I do edit all in scope and do a typo, it'll actually still work, but it'll confuse me later. And lastly, Interpol D. Now we're using some variables that don't exist in this define thing over here, but we're going to change some of the ones that do. I think. Let's find out. Nope, we are. Because we have to use this where it says AVGE here. We're defining it here, and then we're going through the rest of the code and coming in the beginning again, and this is where we get our regeneration. This is where we get our feedback. Is up here. It's the feedback amount, and AVG STUV are the amount that we're doing, which starts out as 0 here, and everything's being defined as 0 here. But we're clearly changing it somewhere, and we've got 4 different ones, so let's find out why we have 4 different ones. Because it's starting from here. Okay, so now I know what's going on. This is why it's doing that droning thing, but not just feeding back or blowing up. I've defined a thing where if the loudness of the reverb tank we're using is high enough, it starts dialing back the feedback here. So this is our feedback, and it's kind of limiting. It's a compressor on these things. I've got that so that it'll make a nice noise rather than a horrible noise. In fact, I can have it feedback intensely and it'll still sort of keep it at that zone. But yeah, this is a sanity check here. And it's being used for the next one, so EFGH and STUV each have their own distinct purposes. So let's change that over to feedback A, BCD. I'll change that momentarily, and compress. And then BCD. And yeah, with things like this, you can also define it like, and this is a array much like these, except for that rather than having to do A, B, C, D, now you're doing a number in some little brackets, and that's how you're keeping track of it. And you can make the code smaller in size that way, but I find that there's a cost in additional layers of abstraction, and which I don't always like. So we're going to call those feedback and compress, which means we also have to initialize them. That's what I did wrong in loud, was I forgot to initialize the variable. So we go up here. And we'll make a BCD out of that. I could leave this in and it would actually work. It's just kind of meaningless. So we'll update it. And now we can straight up just change these things over to the ones that we're now using. So feedback A is going to be this. And need to click the right thing first, because this is where we're taking the outputs of our audio and we're going to listen to the outputs of the audio, but we're also sending it back into the beginning of the delay again at pretty much full volume. So that's how that works. And this is the delay matrix. This is one of them being positive and the rest of them all being negative. And that's what the householder delay matrix does. That can actually be changed, but not necessarily to useful effect. It's the way it is for a reason. So let's see. So we now have these things updated correctly. And I'm going to do these. This edit all in scope stuff is fairly common in what you would call your coding DAW. It's a feature that is often available with varying degrees of sophistication, depending upon which one it is, I suppose. So now we've got those named rationally. And that means we go up to the top here, and it's also talking rationally. we've got our variables for this part, and then it says the delay sample that we're producing is the input audio sample plus however much feedback there is times however much compression there is. Really interesting. Maybe we should go and have a quick look at that while we're at it. We've got the code open, so... Because that's the thing, I mean, sub in BassAmp is messed up anyway. I don't expect it to be good. I feel like it was bad. Also, the audio unit is end-to-end, meaning it's not a stereo thing, so it can't be that. But let's see what it does in the VST, which is a stereo device. Here's BassAmp, just what you told me about. We'll go to proc. There is sub. This is such a messy pile of code, I don't like it at all. But that's the distortion, basically. Here's dub, and then there is I think I might have an idea as to why it might be doing that. Just a wild guess. Because the thing about it is that it's doing two different sub-octave channels. Head bump is operating normally. This is indeed checking to see whether the sub-octave is false. I wonder if I'm flipping both of those. It's supposed to be. Okay, so here we have a confused situation from really old code that I was never really thinking was very good, but let's see what's going on here. It should be able to change this polarity. If it's not able to change the polarity, something is very wrong. No, it should be still be. Here's what we're doing with this. L sub octave gets flipped. And I think I might see some of what's going on, or perhaps not. It's waiting for this thing called L was negative or R was negative. When it does that, it makes the sub-octave polarity be opposite of what it was, and then immediately puts that back. So let's do the same thing we were doing the other thing. Edit all in scope to find out where this is happening. Because it is, well, let's see where it's doing. Don't see it there. That's a clipping. Maybe it's on the very beginning. Alrighty, now this is weird. Like, I know the sub was absolute garbage. I figured that was just how it was going to be. But maybe we're finding what the issue is with there. We're abandoning the matrix reverb, sadly, but let's see what we got. Because we should be checking. Yeah, it's like, I don't see where it's finding this anywhere. And yet it was making a sub-octave-y kind of noise at some points. That confuses me. And there's the rest of it. Also, it only worked when I had dub engaged. You can't see all of this on the screen. This is why I usually have really tiny letters in this, so I can see the damn thing. Where is it doing that? Let's see whether maybe it was RWAS negative that was doing something. Edit all in scope. Or better still, where was that hiding? Find in project as text. Here's your problem. We've got RWAS negative. We're initializing it. Let's see whether that exists in the audio unit, because this ain't right. Maybe it exists in the audio unit code somewhere. This is why I normally would prefer not to work on the old code, is the old code can be a big pile of mess. If it was negative, here's where we do the same thing. This is the AU. Find in project as text. I'm feeling a similar problem. This only exists right here. So I'm baffled as to how it's ever doing this at all, but the deal with this is it needs to be checking whether some of this stuff is going from positive to negative. It's flipping the polarities of suboctave based on that. So something's wrong here. Sub bump equals absolute value of head bump. And we're doing this yeah, this is broken for a reason. I'm going to find out what is wrong with it. And just for laughs, sine bass. Let's look at what this did. We're going to use our audio unit because the same problem exists in both. And we're going to go to Airwindows, BassAmp. And we have an OK output, but sub is broken. So if I go and look at what it did, it just made a big mess. It made silence. There's nothing left. So undo that. And if we monitor it, BassAmp again, see, I ran it and it made it be silent, but, oh no, hang on. Yeah. I forgot I have to include a little bit of this here. So if I apply this, now what I get is this ugly mess. And that's not nearly what we're supposed to have, although it does seem to be changing polarity, but it's clearly not supposed to do that. Like this is swapping polarities, and it's basically being a big jerk. This has nothing to do with what I actually want. So we're going to quit, not save that mess, and start figuring out what's happening with it. Because we might as well, right? I shipped this plugin yesterday, so last minute bug fix for the win or something. Not like I have had too many of those recently. Head bump works fine. Sub bump does not. Sub octave. Yeah, this crap makes no sense. Why are we using an absolute value for sub bump? Because we're trying to take both polarities of it and build it into this sub-octave thing. Now, if sub-octave equals false, that means it flips when that happens. So again, let's find where that exists. If was negative, sub-octave equals negative sub-octave. So that's flipping. This is a big pile of confused, folks. I don't know what I was thinking in 2007. I mean, I was not on drugs, but I must have been very stressed out to get this wrong. Was negative is what this is all chasing after. Meaning that sub-octave is not actually swapping. Let us we got an audio output here. This is our sort of distorty stuff. I think that's on the bright. It's not going to be dry because dry is going to be the dry channel, I think. But the one thing we know isn't happening is there's nothing in here anywhere. Let's go and look at one of the older ones that does use a sub-octave effectively. What did we have in, for instance, BassKit? That I believe also does a sub-octave in a similar way. We got a sub-bump, we got a sub-octave. See how this is similar? This is some of the same code, but something's wrong. I'm missing something from here that should be in BassAmp and isn't. Let's go and find it. Here's our was negative. Find in project as text. Huh. What? This is not right. How does this even work? Where am I going to find? And I may have all manner of debugging. I can't get how BassKit worked. Let's find out whether it does or not. Same sine bass. This time we're going to fire up BassKit and see what that does. And we're going to keep on finding these until we find one that does something. So, there is a similar effect on the regular signal. If I was to apply that, it would be very quiet until it started getting up here, at which point it's loud enough to make a big loud boost. However, BassKit sub. We'll turn that down. See, that's making a subsonic-y like sound there. This is sort of having the frequencies in a characteristic way. See, we're getting a lot of clipping because I've turned it up so much, but this intro stuff is doing something. Let's quit out of here and not save. Like the Beauty Pill song, exit without saving. So if I can solve this, I can figure out what's going on. And I do know that head bump is working, so maybe I'm looking at this all wrong. So in our logic question here, what it does is it says if the low pass is larger than 0, oh, hang on. Alrighty, I think I might have a clue as to how this is working. I'm never going to code anything like this again. This is a big pile of mess. Check this out. You can't see it because it's not laid out right. If we restructure this is also a problem with like 2007 code, where I really didn't know what the hell was going on. Normally you would arrange stuff to look kind of like this. They usually have things in such a way where it takes up more space this way, but it kind of makes sense. In fact, you don't have to have these brackets here. This is where we get our sub bass. This is why not to do stuff like this. Everything is contained within this, saying if ATA low pass is larger than 0, technically 0.0, because this is a floating point number, ATA low pass is coming from well, it's being defined right here, right? Which technically means, do we have it elsewhere? Shouldn't be. We don't. I don't think we do. No, we don't. Yeah. Hi, Darwindies. I'm in coding hell. Just another workday. So this is what we end up using. And we use it by combining it with the other one. This is a sort of crudely anti-aliased pile of shit that, pardon my language, from 2007, before I really knew what I was doing with this kind of stuff. So it's trying very many crazy things, but it's laid out in a confusing way. We're defining this here. We are making a temporary sample and a subtract sample and doing a simple kind of rounding exercise. It's a simple IR filter. It's storing up what's called correction because it's making the simple filter and then keeping track of what it did and then applying it all at once. That is not especially useful, but that's part of the sound of this plugin, so hey. And ATA low pass is going to be, let's go and listen to it directly, shall we? Add that at the end. Now we're just only listening to, open rail heaven. I have no idea. Use whatever tape you can get. I'm not really up to speed on the TAC A2070. Google it. Google it. Now let's listen directly to ATA low pass. We're going to find out what the heck that even was. But we're going to have to compile it twice because it's an audio unit, so if I don't have the build folder, it needs to do all of its work twice. That's just the way that works. It's kind of cumbersome that way. I'm going to have to go to desktop for that. Meh, that's not right. EU, build, release. Okay. Let's fool with this some. Let's see what ATA low pass was. Open up those sine bases again. Now if we listen to it, we're hearing only that one variable. Oh no, that's bass kit. What am I doing? We don't want bass kit. It just looks similar. We want BassAmp rather than bass kit because this is the one that we just changed the variable on. And we no longer have access to high. We no longer have access to dry. We have only that one variable. Turn everything down. We're still hearing it. So this is what ATA low pass looks like. It is a filter. It's turning stuff up seemingly a little bit, but it is a filter. Now that we know that, what do we do? Now that we know that, let's go back to where we were fooling with it. Here is the guts of our mess. We have created it, and then here is where we were doing the suboctave stuff. So this is how this is constructed. If the low pass is larger than 0, if was negative, then suboctave gets flipped. Otherwise, no. It was negative sits around never being touched up until this point. So, was negative sits around being true. Hang on. Is this even constructed right? And you know what? I don't need these brackets here either. What I need is for this to be in lines like this. So what we're trying to do is when ATA low pass, which is a wave, goes from negative to positive, it flips this one frequency once. When I flip suboctave, it will go from whatever is in there being negative to whatever is in there being positive. So we only see this when ATA low pass is larger than 0. If it's less than 0, we never see it. Let's see how this is constructed. I keep saying that. I mean, this code makes no freaking sense. I'd rather be working on my matrix code, but such is the life. And I did ship this just yesterday, so if there is something that I can do to fix it, then I will. And I bet this is where we get our highs, is like removing this from the signal. Maybe we can rephrase. Because that's what that means. And editing all in scope means this will still build. Yes? Or no? No, apparently not. That's because that was in the other file. That was in H. So I have to fix it there. We're going to get to the end of this eventually, I hope. This is why I need to avoid doing code from 2007. Well, let's see whether we can get anything happening, because I do know that the that sub octave was working really, really badly. I mean, it really was. So can we build? We can try. Yes, we can. So here's where we get our sub octave. Sub bump is the absolute value of head bump. I'm not convinced that's right, but I am convinced that, well, actually, let's find out. It's not the absolute value of head bump anymore. Now, I don't have anything really useful for... I know, I'll do one of the full audio things. So, BassAmp. Well, you're not supposed to be doing anything. Do we still have that thing in there somewhere? We shouldn't. Oh, we shouldn't, but this is the one that I just did. I didn't replace it. Here. I was going to do a before and after. That's not going to work. The pain. Now, try dub. It's kind of a mess. It is different though. And then let's try it on one of these sines. Sine bass ought to give us something. And then we can look at the waveform that we get. Here's our dub. Apply that, and now we're getting something weird. It's chasing back and forth. Like when the signal, and I had an idea. Do not save. Let's grab this out of here. This is only manipulating the sub-octave. Why are we doing that on just the low pass? Why? Makes no sense. Doesn't need to be that. What it needs to be is the head bump. Let's put this back to what it was. Sometimes these things get into jams where they're doing something and then I touch something and it breaks and I just try to hold it together. And that might have been what happened here. So, head bump is that low frequency thing. Here I thought that this was doing a only engaging when the low stuff was on. Maybe I still have something in here doing that. No, I guess not. But what we really should be watching for, rather than the original signal, we should be watching for this low frequency signal, the head bump, which is the dub knob to pass 0, and run the sub-octave off of that, because we're running the sub-octave off of literally what head bump is. So we're literally starting, here's how this works, right? We're taking this thing, which is head bump. Head bump is out of my usual bass magnifying code. It's doing this stuff. Essentially what it is doing is making a big fat bass tone. And then sub bump is supposed to be that, but every other cycle is sort of flipped. And then that is supposed to be filtered. Now, if I take this out and then code it like this, what's going to happen is sub bump equals the absolute value of head bump. And that does make sense. And then as it crosses from negative to positive, it goes positive. Which means, actually, now that I have to edit this other stuff too, hang on, we're not done. We'll call that now head bump was negative, because that's what we really want. We will edit all in scope. And then we have to go and change it up here because it exists up here. And spell it correctly. And having done that, we have now moved this down here. So head bump is going to start out as being exactly the same waveform. But that waveform, I should have paper. I don't have convenient paper. You'll just have to deal with me talking about it. It's only another 5 minutes or so before I need to go and lie down. Waveform goes like this, right? Up and down. When we make it an absolute value, it only goes up. If we do this thing where we're checking for every time it passes through positively, we're going to make a situation where instead it's going up, up, down, down, up, up, down, down, because it's taking each of the head bump waves and making them be positive. So everything's always positive, but then as it passes through positive, it flips the polarity. Passes through negative, it doesn't flip the polarity yet. Passes through positive, it flips the polarity again. And what we should get out of this, with flipping suboctave, and then saying if suboctave is false, subbump equals negative subbump. And we don't need those brackets here either. This chunk, especially when we're not filtering it, I took this part out, should give me the same thing as the head bump waveform, but doubled up. Let's go and find out whether that's true. And it's weirdly similar, but not, to what we were doing with what was already there. And let me make the MatrixReverb stuff go away because we're not going to be able to return to that today. Be that as it may, this is interesting, and if it really works, I'll throw a quick update at you, and then it will fix the thing on stream. So let's build. Let's copy it over to the components folder firstly. We haven't talked about that code on the stream yet, so this is one of the things that I've got going on that is a little unusual. And if we have lots of dub, it is a nicely filtered waveform, undo. But if we now do BassAmp and sub, which I believe I can shut dub off at this stage. Nope. I should fix that. Just a tiny little bit. That's not nearly enough. Again. Yeah, because dub needs to actually be a waveform for this to work. This is what we were talking about. We're making an attempted waveform that starts out as a sine wave, going down and up, but then we are keeping track of it and causing both of these to be positive and then both of them to be negative. And that is how the sub thing works. As you can see, it works a little weird, but this is what it does. And, don't save, if we took that one and ran it on that piece of music from earlier, and just straight up listen to it. I really should have some like bass guitar things or something in here. it can't really manage the notes very well, but we got a note. And we got a nice clean subsonic note, or at least more clean than it was, because we're no longer trying to track it off of an earlier part of the circuit. We're tracking it off of the same thing that we're modulating now. That's a useful bug fix. We're going to do that. So that produces a subsonic frequency thing that's working, and now we have a filter that applies itself to it, and in a rather cumbersome way, we're making it be head bump, which is the bassy frequency. We're sort of bridge rectifying it so that it's only positive, and then we're only switching polarities every other switch, making it be an octave down, but it always returns to 0 in the middle of that octave, and then we're filtering it so that it might be kind of blurry and grungy, but it won't go back to 0 between cycles. It'll kind of resist a little bit. Although that will make it not cross over. So I could zero out all the IR sub stuff, but I probably don't need to. Let's find out what it does. Build. Put into components. Let's fire up our bassy sine and have a little hack at it. There's our dub. Now we've got sub cranked up as high as we can, so let's see what we get. And this is what it looks like. And I see a potential problem, but it's not an insuperable problem. Signal swings up, swings down, but not all the way. And it kind of tries to follow. This is basically chasing both of those signals. I wonder whether I can get access to the head bump frequency even when a dub is down to 0. I wonder whether that's on the input or the output. That gain thing is on the input. I don't think I can do that. But I am getting something of a result. So let's build that. I haven't actually touched it, but that's fine. And let's try it on musical style things as such. Here, this is a more electronic thing going on. I might get more notes out of it. That's not going to work. Oh, too spacey. I can't run this into my BassAmp. Too much weird stuff going on there. Let us go back to... I know I have at least that one song that starts out with a flute. So back into our BassAmp. Bassy sounds. And then trying to do a sub-octave. already it's sounding a lot better. Which is not to say good, but I hear a sub-octave in there. I'm going to say that's good enough for me. Let's call that an update for the AU, and let's quickly run through what we need to do in order to make the VST be updated as well. Firstly, that would help to open it. So the other ones get built off the Mac VST, so if we can do this for the Mac VST, it'll hold for both of them. And here we are apparently trying to find stuff. And I think we changed the name of things. Yeah, there is that. I'm calling it head bump was negative. Therefore, if I was to go to no, you close. I'm not using you anymore. Mac VST, BassAmp, we might be able to find. You know what? I'm going to leave it saying R was negative. Because you know what? I can leave that bit alone. And I'm tempted to change it in the other BassAmp as well for consistency. I will. That sits up here. That is back to what we had in the very beginning, but now it's in a more appropriate place and is less confusing. And it builds. Yes, it does. Technically, I could test that out, but I know I've just changed a variable, so I'm reasonably comfortable that there are no gotchas hidden in there. Now what we got to do is use this as an example to fix this. And in this, we have L was negative and R was negative, and those are all the same, and the actual code is still fine. But what we must do is find where it's being used. See, it's an even bigger pile of mess because it's left and right channels. And that lives here. But we're going to change one specific thing. We're moving it here. And we're checking head bump rather than this other stuff, and that's the only change I actually needed to make. And also moving it here to where we have a more current version. And this is what applies it. We're going to still have this in here. You see how it's similar, except for it's just kind of doubled up. Sometimes that's how I make these work. And then we're going to go down here and back up a bit, find where we're doing that again, and paste that in, because this is where we want it. It's the same thing that we had before. And then scoot up here and remove this part. And that is the 64-bit version, whereas up here is the 32-bit version. And we have to build because we have no build folder in here. But now, as a sort of final magical trick, let's listen to the debug. Clouseau and the debug. Let's listen to the debug. It is here. So, if I do this, I'm off the hook. I get to stop streaming and go and make a sandwich or something. But I think we got it. Firstly, the control. VST effects, BassAmp. This is as shipped. That is the subsonic circuit, which is doing that, following the waveform and trying to do 2 positive, 2 negative from the wrong place. Option drag, VST. This is doing the same thing, but chasing the frequency flip thing on the one that's getting modulated, which is cleaner, or should be. And we're going to find out momentarily. Oh, hang on. Set to the same thing. We've just updated BassAmp. You can't get much bass on those little speakers, but I'm going to call that a successful debug. Yeah, I bet you can't hear that at all. But you can hear how it's not scrunching away like a crazy thing. And that, my friends, is a bug fixing from 2007. And a big pile of mess it was, too. This is why I'd rather code stuff more from scratch or work on new projects like MatrixReverb, which we're going to have to get back to next week. But honestly, I would say it was worth it. I will now stop streaming, go and produce the Windows and Linux versions of that VST, and upload the bug fix for you folks. Lightman Reggae, you're welcome. And on that note, I'll talk to you folks later. Yeah, guitar by number, this is not your week. I cannot continue any longer, but I'm about to upload the bug fix for the plugin that I just did the other night. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.